All right, so welcome everybody to what is going to be another episode of Beyond Spray and Pray 1000. I am Spray and Pray 1000. Today, well, I can't even remember the last time I did this. This must have been at least like maybe maybe about a month since I've done this, which is bad. I know I always say this. I try to make this podcast a regular thing that I do, and to that end, I need to do it more. I mean, I just need to do it every 2 weeks, like I always say. A lot has happened in the gaming world. Needless to say, there is a couple major things, a few minor things. I think the biggest ones are just coming up here in a minute. So let's dive right into it. The first thing is, and the biggest thing by far, is that Microsoft has purchased Bethesda. They flat out purchased it. They now own Bethesda. And what's actually kind of good about me delaying the podcast until today, which is something I'll rarely ever say, is that because I delayed it till today, more news came out even just an hour ago. Holy shit, I'm really lucky. That Phil Spencer had a interview with Kotaku where there's a lot of stuff in it, but specifically Phil Spencer clarified, and to quote him, quote, no, not quote laugh, I'm sorry, but seriously, but to quote him, Xbox does not have to ship games on any other platforms. So, in order to fulfill their business agreement with Bethesda, they are planning on shipping it between Xbox, like the Series X and the Series S, and xCloud and PC. So whatever lets them sell that the most is their major plan, and basically anything Sony, for at least from the sounds of this, it doesn't sound like it would be impossible or outright wrong or in violation of their contract to do so. However, it does not seem that appears to be their plan, and that is basically to imply that they will only release these games on Xbox and PC platforms, which is completely in line with what Microsoft has been doing for the last for the last generation, more or less. They, instead of focusing on creating as many different exclusives and hardware as they can, much like Sony, they have instead decided to try to expand the range of people who can play their games, who can opt into their service. And by doing so, they can basically corner the market so that even if you're not on one of their major products, you can still at least partake of the games and you can partake of what they're offering, so they at least don't take a complete L. For instance, if you only buy a PlayStation and buy PlayStation games. Now, my only complaint about this whole organization, this whole situation, and to be fair, acquiring as many studios under the Microsoft brand label was their strategy at least as far back as 2 or 3 E3s ago. I remember that when they acquired Obsidian, who were the developers of Fallout New Vegas, among other games, it was a big revelation that Microsoft could literally just rope in all these different companies, especially a big one like that. And even to this day, it's still kind of more of the same deal. It's rather shocking to imagine that they could rope in basically one of their biggest, I don't want to say competitors, but a fellow publisher. I mean, Bethesda even had, floor space and conferences at E3. So I don't know if it remains to be seen if that'll just get merged in with Microsoft's time or how that's going to work out. I guess it's really up to them how they want to do it. But it's a very big step because, as we know, Bethesda, while they have more or less released most of the games in the last year or so that I would say are big games, like they released Dishonored. Well, Dishonored 2 was a while ago, and then they had the DLC for that. They already released Prey. Evil Within 2 already came out. Both Dooms have come out. Fallout 4 and 76 is a wash. Really, the next big games I could think of and Wolfenstein 2 already came out, as well as Youngblood, which I didn't play because I'm not really interested in it. The next big games that Microsoft and I guess now Bethesda Bethesda and I guess now Microsoft are looking to drop are Elder Scrolls 6, which doesn't have a title. It's just known as Elder Scrolls 6. And Starfield. I'm looking at the slide that they have. Starfield, of course, both titles being more or less just kind of off in the distance. And like I said, my only real complaint is that this didn't kick in, 5-6 years ago. I guess maybe back then it was still a more tumultuous time with Microsoft after the really soft launch of the Xbox One. It would definitely play more to their benefit, however, to at least continue this going on, because there's definitely going to be a lot of games. Having something like this, even just to prevent Sony from having it, is a very, very strong thing. And I think, needless to say, it'll definitely shape the gaming landscape for years to come. Now, again, it was a $7.5 billion acquisition, and I guess to that end, they more or less did what everyone thought they were going to do, which was to say, hey, these games are just going to be on our platform from now on, which I think is fair enough. I think that that's just how it's going to be. And while I don't necessarily want to see the entire gaming industry boil down to what company has the most money to buy out everyone else, which would, be kind of disgusting and wouldn't be that great, I don't think that they're necessarily out of line here. I think that acquiring it is a great way to sort of sweeten the deal. So I kind of stand on a little bit of both sides, but I think ultimately it's probably going to be for the best, especially when you see what Bethesda has done in the last 4 or 5 years of working with their titles. I mean, other than re-releasing Skyrim and just a couple of games that are good and a couple of games that are bad, and then there's Fallout 76, which is in a complete category of its own. Yeah, I think that's kind of a big thing. Other than that, they really want to push Xbox Series S as an affordable option for gaming. Now, Xbox Series S, of course, is the digital-only version. It has slightly inferior hardware, and it will run basically all the same games. What they really want to do is they want to slide Xbox Game Pass on as many different consoles and as many different platforms as possible. And to that end, they want to use xCloud. They want to use things like the Series S, which is more affordable and basically like the layman's entry into it. And it's kind of the same thing that Nintendo tried to do late with the Wii, where they stripped out all the GameCube hardware and just made it a smaller disc, well, it was still disc-based, but just a smaller Wii in general. It's like they do this with a lot of consoles. But specifically with the Xbox Series S, they want to get it in as many homes as possible. They want to encourage people to buy it. They want to encourage people to pay for live and, do the whole console thing. And I think that's a really strong thing to consider, especially when they are trying to push it on as many platforms, with Game Pass giving you access to a ton of games, and you could just play them as much as you want, and then when you're done, you don't really have to think about it, you don't have to worry about it. I'm a very old school kind of person, to a fault, for better or for worse. I prefer very much having the ability to hold my games physically. I still very much pride myself on the physical medium. I think that having a game in your hands is an important part of it. And a lot of it is just personal taste. I just personally prefer holding my games and having something physical. That's the era of gaming that I came from and what I still hold kind of dear. And in a lot of other cases, I also hold it dear because if you have a digital game, sometimes when you lose internet connection, or anything could happen, for instance, you just get kicked out. You just get the fucking boot. And I think that that's really annoying. I think that that's something that's completely avoidable in the grand scheme of things because, well, I mean, it is and it also isn't. They want to make sure that you verified your license for a game, but that's also what kind of makes it annoying, is that I have to verify it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And I understand why they do it, because otherwise there could be maybe some exploit or something that lets people get behind it, and if they verify it enough times, and then they get the game for free. If there's like a spoof that you could do for the check or something along those lines. But ultimately, I got to think more from the customer side, because I myself am a customer. I'm not a Microsoft employee. I'm not a Sony employee. And getting kicked off a game without being able to save, without being able to do anything, just because, PSN had a problem or your internet went down, is just not fun. And I think that that's why game discs are going to continue to exist until who knows when, honestly, because I think personally there's going to need to be infrastructure change before they finally get completely eradicated, because not everyone lives in an area with good internet. I personally live in New York City, which is one of the biggest metropolises on the planet, and even then sometimes my internet goes out, and maybe not for long, you know, maybe like an hour on the worst case, like maybe an hour or two once a year. But you know, who knows what that hour or two could have been. And even then, it has affected some of my streams. There was a week where my internet was just garbage and I couldn't stream. I couldn't even play online games. It was very not fun. And it's just one of those things. I mean, now imagine living out in the sticks and there's a storm or an earthquake or a tornado or anything you could imagine, right? And well, congrats. I mean, your power line went down, your internet went down. Well, it'll be like maybe 2 weeks before whoever it is decides, hey, maybe we should try to fix that. You know, it's not seen as a totally essential resource, even though it is, you know, starting to get a little bit more essential. But, you know, it's not like water, it's not like heat, it's not like, you know, gas. It's the internet. And I mean, humans survived a long time without it. And even though you're a paying customer, you know, sometimes life just gets in the way of shit. It just happens. So that would be my stipulation on that. I prefer to have physical games. It's a major part. If you get, and this is going to be a topic coming up in a little bit, or actually I could do it right now. I just haven't put it on the thing, which is kind of bad. If you get banned off of a console and all your games are digital, odds are you could eat shit and you will just no longer be able to have access to your library because your account will be banned. Whereas if you have a physical medium, and granted, I don't encourage cheating, I don't encourage hacking, I don't encourage anything like that for systems, especially in multiplayer games to give you an advantage or to steal from companies. However, you know, stuff happens, people get false reported all the time, and because of that, I think it's very wise to always have a backup. It's always very wise to have something physical, because when I get banned off something, the employees do not come to my house and snap my discs and tell me go fuck off and eat shit. That was the fear last console generation when they were having one-to-one association with games on, at least Xbox One was the major proponent of it. I forget if Sony was really dabbling in. Perhaps Sony just didn't think about it soon enough, which could also be just as likely. But I think probably the biggest part of it is that now we kind of have that happening just in a different way. They solved the whole used game crisis in a completely different way. Although at least in Microsoft's case, you're only really paying a fraction of the game's actual cost when you buy it or when you play it, at least through a Game Pass, because that's generally how that works. And I mean, at least for that, that's kind of a good thing. You know, you're not technically paying for each game, you merely rent it. And it's kind of like the red box of gaming. It's kind of like, you know, if people even remember what the hell red box even was. I believe Netflix used to offer that. I forget. There was another service a friend of mine used to use, and I completely forget what it was and how it worked because I never did it myself. But at the bare minimum, you know, it's kind of like one of those things. You get to play it, so you don't really get to hear it and hit it as much as you can. You don't really get to lose or miss out on anything. Which is kind of nice. But I think the biggest problem with it is that they solved the whole used game thing by just making it so that digital is less of a hassle and in a lot of cases more affordable. And while I can't blame them for offering solutions, or at least Microsoft for offering solutions to the possibly increasing price of games, which at least for Sony is confirmed, at the same time, I also don't necessarily fault them. Or at the same time, I also realize that it's going to lead to a decrease in physical media. You're not going to be able to own your games if you fuck up. If you do something, or if the system says you did something, then you are going to be the one left holding the bag. You are the one where your games, you know, your hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, because yes, gaming is getting more expensive. I mean, $10 per game is a lot more. It's an increased amount. It's definitely going to be way more cost worthy, and is going to have a lot more to it. Unlike, you know, anything else, like $60 was already considered to be high for a lot of games. A lot of games became designated rents, and I've even said that a lot of games are only worth rents, for instance. I think that's probably the biggest element of it. Which brings me to my next point, because Sony, in all their infinite wisdom, have come out with a system where users will be able to clip a party chat on PS5 and be able to send it to Sony, who can then possibly action your account and report you, and anything can happen. And presumably this is for things like saying racial slurs and other things like that, or anything out of the ordinary, or harassment, or anything really. And the first thing I think in my head is Big Brother, of course. And the second thing I think in my head, as I do with a lot of these things, because this is just how the universe works, is how is this system going to be abused? How is this system going to be possibly exploited? How can it be completely ridiculously just broken? And the only thing that I can really think of in this case, which is the only thing I need to think of, is that people will report you for any reason under the sun, because that is how the universe works. That's how people are on video games. They will report you for anything you do, regardless of whether or not it's the right thing to do, it's the correct thing to do, if you're actually in the wrong, or if you're just having a disagreement based on literally anything under the sun, as humans always have done across all of human history. And from there, I mean, you're at the mercy possibly of a Sony exec who may or may not action you. And the action could be as simple as maybe like a party chat ban. We don't really know the scope of it. At least the last time I checked, we don't really know the scope of this. Or you could just be flat out banned. And that would be a horrible fucking case. I mean, even if this is a niche fringe thing that only hits maybe a couple thousand people, I mean, would you very much like to be one of the couple thousand people that gets banned because someone didn't like the cut of your jib? They didn't like anything that you said, and some Sony exec who may or may not have an understanding of what's okay to say and what isn't decides to get rid of you. And you might say, oh, well, it'll only be for slurs, it'll only be for really targeted harassment. And you might be right. And in a realistic, or not in a realistic, in an idealistic world, you would be correct, because that would be the only way it would be used. It's not for people to throw people out. It's only for the real shitheads, the toxic people. But you have to remember that over the last 7, even almost a shorter time span than that, certain phrases, due to the political time, certain phrases and certain things have just become verboten. They've just become thrown out of the fucking window. And granted, one of my friends even made this argument, you could just not join party chats with people you don't know. But I think that ultimately that marks kind of the death of meeting people online and playing games with them. It might have been slowly sliding away, as time moved on and on. But I think there's a certain element of video gaming where you meet and associate and you talk with people. And, people come from all walks of life, all manner of political and religious backgrounds. And gaming is sort of like one of those things, it's like sports. It unites people. It's something that everyone enjoys. And to say that, well, now we just need to, out of paranoia of the other person, for over fear of possibly losing my account or being actioned for it, we just can't talk anymore. We can't take that risk. And a lot of the people that I've talked to over the years have been from online. They have been, in general, from different games, maybe different websites, different media, or different mediums, I'm sorry. And to say that, well, now we just, I can't take that risk anymore because I can't trust that people won't possibly, get me actioned or anything. I mean, it kind of renders the whole idea of having a party system pretty moot. Unless you want to specifically not use Discord, which, while it has its own criteria and own set of problems, at least on Discord, you don't get banned off Steam or you don't get banned off PlayStation because you want to, you might have said something that offended someone. I think that's the key difference, is that I'm not talking about people who actually probably deserve to be actioned, although I do think getting action over voice chat is fucking dumb anyway, and let alone the stuff that Ubisoft was doing in Siege a couple weeks or a couple months back. Not a couple weeks, I'm sorry, a couple months back. I think it's just, in general, another step of just, hey, corporations are going to take more and more control. They're going to monitor what you say. And they're definitely going to have an element of it where there's a punishment element, where they can arbitrarily decide what's okay and what's not okay to say. And I think even in today's political climate, it's ever obvious that what is and isn't okay to say is constantly having the line drawn and redrawn and fixed and changed over and over and over again. So, for instance, the term sexual preference is now considered to be offensive. The Senate, the Supreme Court nominee, ACB, or Amy Coney Barrett, I think said the phrase, and within about 24 hours, Merriam-Webster changed it to be offensive, and all these other things changed it to be offensive because it's against their political ideology, and they want to use it as free gotcha points to strike back at people they don't like. And that has just been the crux of most social issues over the last half a decade, maybe even longer. I'd argue that the seeds of this were planted even longer ago, but it's definitely been a major driving force, is that the things I don't like have to be removed, and people have to be punished for not liking it. They turned the OK symbol into a hate symbol, all these sort of things. So it's not completely out of line to say that what's okay to say for the average common person, like maybe not everyone who says it will get banned, maybe not everyone who says it gets reported will get banned, but do you really want to be banned for saying something like that? And I think the obvious answer is no, but that's how life works. People get banned for stuff that they did or did not do. I have a couple of friends who have gotten banned or actioned on other games that for saying obviously normal things that any other sane human would understand the logic behind, but a power-crazed mod at a company is not going to sit there and say, well, this was the human element of using it, and this is not even necessary. It's not even like a racial slur. It's just uncommon dialogue, so therefore, okay, whatever, it's fine. And I play Final Fantasy XIV. It's one of my favorite games, probably one of my all-time it definitely is my all-time most played game, but it's probably also the number one game that does this. It is a very easy to get banned in game, where people get banned for anything as much as just disagreeing with each other. On the very extreme cases, people who disagree with each other on 14, they get banned, they get reported, and not every report immediately gets you thrown in the Mordian jail. But I mean, obviously, it is something to say, and kind of proves my point, I would argue, that people will report you for literally anything. I had a bunch of people report me because I was using a rotation that wasn't exactly super optimal and super great in one of my runs, just because I was lazy. Did it affect us clearing the dungeon? Not at all. Did it somehow impact their gameplay or make their gameplay experience worse? No, not at all. I was still fulfilling my job as a tank. However, this guy still felt it was some great offense to him that I was playing in this manner, and therefore decided to report me. And he flat out said, "Yeah, I'm reporting you. You're a, I forget what he called me, like a git, which I guess is a European insult." But him and I guess his girlfriend, who was the healer, because of course simps are gonna fucking simp for their girlfriends. Apparently I had committed some grave offense to them without even talking. I don't even talk half the time in roulettes because of this exact reason. And it kind of discourages the whole idea of gaming as a social medium when people just decide arbitrarily, well, this person killed me a bunch in Call of Duty, system tampering, player unfamiliar with the game or something. I mean, Xbox has a whole system based off of that. And granted, it doesn't do anything, but thankfully it doesn't do anything, because people will take that time to file that 30-second report even when it does nothing. So what makes you think that they won't do it if it does something is ultimately the argument that I'm going to make. And by the way, that simp and his girlfriend sucked at 14, and they were doing worse than I was. However, of course, I would be the one at fault. And thankfully, Final Fantasy didn't action me for anything. Like I said, 90% of reports might just go whatever. They might just be, whoever, even if it's like 99.9. But do you really want to roll that fucking odd every time you play a game? I mean, it's going to happen to somebody. Eventually, someone is going to get banned for something they did or did not do. I mean, that's just how the universe is. You roll that 99% chance, on a fair roll and nothing, system manipulation like I believe Fire Emblem does. You will eventually roll that 1%. And even if the odds are 99.9, someone out of the millions of people who will own a PlayStation is going to get DOS boot for that. And of course, I'm talking about the people who are innocent. And a reasonable person would say that they're innocent and not doing anything wrong and not saying anything too ridiculous. A lot of people are just going to get punished for that. And that's completely unfair. And Sony is massively overstepping their boundaries, I feel, by doing this, at risk of losing your console. Because again, the goalpost of what's normal, what's neutral, what's okay to say literally gets shifted all the time in today's political climate. And a lot of it is for political reasons, a lot of it is for just any reason under the fucking sun. And you might say, well, I'll be reasonable, I'll be rational, but what's reasonable and rational today was not reasonable and rational even 2 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So, Sony, in my opinion, doing ridiculous Big Brother stuff is never cool. I think it's always been fucking stupid to do stuff like that. But that's the card they want to play, and I don't think anyone really is cheering for them at that. I don't think it's a really grand stance to take, but we'll see what happens. Because ultimately, and this is the other thing I said, is that if this is something that they're just saying that they're going to do it, not actually, change how much they ban or their metrics, and it's just words they're putting out, then what is the purpose of doing this other than just to fillet, I guess, media? So that way they could, weirdly say, like, oh, we're cutting down on white supremacy or anything along those lines. Is that the only reason that they really want to do it? Because otherwise, if it's something that they're just saying they're going to do and not actually do, is that the stance that they're just going to take just arbitrarily, just to put it out, get a couple brownie points in the month of October, and then just forget about it and never talk about it again? I mean, maybe. But then I would say, well, now they're just basically throwing more wood on the fire. They're not really aiding anything. They're not helping anything, because ultimately someone will figure out if they made good on this or not. Either people will get banned and people will notice, or people won't and people will somehow notice. I mean, a lot of stuff just gets thrown into the fucking memory hole. People forget it, and it's like it just never happened. But I still think there's something to be said when they have a system like this and they don't do anything with it just to get, political clout, or because, hey, I want a bunch of nice websites to write articles about me, as though gaming websites are anywhere near the most trustworthy way to get information and news about games half the time anymore, especially when it comes to like certain things about gaming culture. I'm not going to get into that, but I digress. Other than that, Amazon canceled Crucible, which is kind of nice. It's not kind of nice, depending how you look at it. I think that the problem that a lot of these MMO games are receiving now is that, sorry, I had to scratch my back. The problem that a lot of gaming news and a lot of gaming developers are seeing now is that, especially with Avengers getting, at some points, having Mankind Divided take a bigger peak of active players over it, is that these shooter-looter co-op games, these MMO games, always kind of come out, and the problem is that there's never enough content to really justify playing and buying it. And I think Destiny kind of learned that. If not with Destiny 1, then Destiny 2, The Division kind of learned that. There's only so much you could do with shooters. I think that the reason why WoW and Final Fantasy and ESO and all these other games work out is because fundamentally at their core, they're RPGs. They have long stories, they have lots of content to do, lots of stuff, in-depth rotations, very open-ended fights. I mean, with cover and looter shooters, basically you spend most of your time hiding behind walls, taking cover, not shooting at stuff. Whereas within any other, spell-based or fantasy MMO, you're generally fighting something, gaining experience, working together with people. Whereas with Destiny, a lot of it just comes down to throw grenade, melee power, which you won't ever really get to use because enemies will insta-melee you down if you get too close, and then a super, which may or may not be very helpful, and in my experience was mostly used to cheese fights. Which was fun at points, but until you realize that Destiny 1 didn't have a lot of infrastructure to find people to do raids with. In fact, once again, to go back to the concept of having people be punished for stuff they do in party chats arbitrarily, based on however the mods are feeling and whoever they're playing with, the infrastructure to play with people on Destiny 1 heavily revolved around having a party system and a party chat. The game chat for Destiny was distance-based, if I remember correctly, meaning that the further away you were from someone, the more muffled out they sounded. And generally, a lot of games do that. It adds to the realness factor and the immersion. I know Phantasmaphobia, which is the co-op ghost hunter game that recently came out, it does that to a large extent. But the easiest way around that, when you just want to cooperate and do stuff, is party chat. And party chat was a large part of that. You know, you invite people to parties. I remember you had to do it on Reddit, which is already another complaint for another time, that they don't even have the infrastructure to do it in the game. But, or at least at the time they didn't. I stopped playing Destiny after House of Wolves or whatever the second expansion was. I even buy the first expansion, I think, until way later, because I just didn't care. But the fact of the matter is that was still a large chunk of doing stuff with people. It was to play Destiny, to meet people. It was meant to be that social sort of game. And as they put more and more of these games on console, that's something that's just going to happen. Not every game is going to have voice chat. I mean, even Final Fantasy XIV does not have voice chat. WoW, which is getting controller support, I think, for Shadowlands, may or may not have that same element. And because of that, you know, it's a very important thing to do. It's just something that happens in games, is that people want a voice chat element. I mean, ultimately, you could just go on Discord, you could go on TeamSpeak, even Skype still exists. There's probably other systems that I'm not aware of that you could also use. But the point still remains is that party chat and voice chat as a whole is still a very important part of playing games in general. It's something that, if not making friends and, you know, uniting people to work together and to talk to each other, at the bare minimum, it lets you play a game together. And Destiny didn't have that. And well, Destiny had it, but Destiny itself couldn't function without that. In fact, the whole raid system didn't really work too well. But that's the thing about MMOs, is that they need to have a lot of content. They need to have something that people can team up together with and have a post game and have an ending with and do shit together. And that's what WoW and Final Fantasy have. You know, they have lots of raiding. They have stuff that you could do. There's tons of fights that you can engage in. And at any given point, a Final Fantasy patch gives you probably, I'd say, you know, dozens of hours, if not days of content, depending how much you want to involve yourself in. Whereas with Destiny, I remember at launch, once you beat the rather short story, it was like 6 strikes and then PvP. And that was it. You just played those 6 strikes over and over. You do the Nightfall once a week, which, depending on how cheesable it is and how much, you know, how many weapons you have that can cheese, could be very short. And then that's it. And then you would just play, and they want you to play the game over and over. And that's something that I think that they need to figure out with a lot of these games, because Anthem is currently suffering from this too. And Anthem is definitely in the doghouse as far as that's concerned. And it's unfortunate that Amazon had to cancel it, but ultimately I kind of see why they had to. I don't think that they had much faith in it, seeing that even a game with as big of a name as Avengers behind it had to be basically thrown to the wolves. And they also unreleased the game. It's kind of sad, and there's not really too much else to say about that. But Amazon has been making other moves in the gaming industry. They are launching Amazon Luna, which will be a cloud-based gaming service for PC, Mac, iOS, and Android. It will have over 100 games available. It'll be for $5.99 a month. It'll be for 4K and 60 FPS on select titles, and it will have integration with Twitch. Now, if the Sony integration with streaming and recording is anything to go by, I don't think many people who actively stream on Twitch will want to do that unless maybe they get like a sponsor deal, because using Sony to record gameplay would probably be the dumbest decision I think I've ever. I mean, people who said that didn't really understand, I guess, the technical aspect of it, so fair enough to them on that. But the reason why I say that it will just never work and it's going to be a mistake is because the way that Sony ran, not SharePlay, but even that too, was very obtuse. It was meant more for clipping if you don't have a recording thing running all the time, which is nice because it saves you a little bit of effort and time in setting up. But it's not something you could make a long-form playthrough off of. And in some cases, some games, you can't even record clips, period, based on the publisher's settings or whatever, which was extra annoying. I believe all of Persona 5 was a blocked scene, which was really obnoxious at the time, and I'm not sure why Atlas felt that was the right thing to do. I know at least one game is. It might have been Tales of Zestiria that was also, if not that one that I'm thinking of. But yeah, I mean, part of the biggest issue I think with that is that, I mean, we had OnLive do this a while back. OnLive's major problem was that there wasn't really any games on it. I think they put like Darksiders on it. The Ouya also kind of did this more for crowd-funded games, which I at least respect a little more, to have a console that isn't adherent to super big business practices. But the biggest competitor to this is Google Stadia, which in and of itself has kind of already been thrown to the side. I think that like a lot of problems, it requires heavy internet. You know, you have consoles coming out that can buy more, do more, afford you more. So what's really the point of buying stuff like Google Stadia? It doesn't really affect you to buy Google Stadia for whatever and have massive problems at launch and do all the founders whatever, when you could just buy a console, have access to a wider variety of games that you know are going to work on the hardware, not require an internet connection. I mean, ideally. I mean, even if they do, right? Like, let's say you download, I don't know, what's a game that's coming out? Let's say you digitally download Cyberpunk. Yeah, you might have a problem. You know, the download might be slow, but once it's downloaded, all it does is need to check the license however often it checks, and that's it. You could just play the game. It doesn't matter. Whereas with the Stadia, you have to constantly stream the game to your console, which will then come out. You know, it's just a lot less is required of you on the internet side, and arguably the power aspect of new consoles easily outweighs any real benefit from the Stadia. I don't really see much of a benefit to it, other than, well, someone else is running the running the game somewhere. I mean, that's what I mean. I don't really see much of a benefit. You don't have to download it. It's cheaper, but it's a subscription based anyway. So eventually, you know, you're gonna equate it, probably, depending how much you play. Maybe you never will. But that's why I don't like Stadia is more or less just being kept alive by Google, pumping fresh blood into it at this point. Same thing with Luna. I mean, I don't particularly see this taking off, even with the integration with Twitch. I mean, modern game consoles have integration with Twitch. If you're serious about content creation, I'd argue that you would buy some form of a capture card. You would augment your rig. I mean, that's generally what I would see. I don't know. But other than that, you want to talk about movies? The Resident Evil movie got teased. They showed off all the actors. It'll actually have something to do with Resident Evil. So it's going to go over the events of the first game and presumably the second game. That's why they cast Leon and Claire, because they don't appear in the first game. In addition to the Mansion trilogy. The Mansion 5, basically. There's only really 5 major characters in Resident Evil 1. The rest kind of get killed off, or are minor characters. There is also, I don't know if they're going to ever include Resident Evil 3, like let's say this does well. The Resident Evil series takes a lot of diverging plot points after the first 4. Well, I mean, I guess you could argue that the first 5 games in the chronology are really closely related, that being 0, Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and Resident Evil Code Veronica X. I feel bad for Code Veronica, especially since Resident Evil 4 has been confirmed getting a remake before it. If Code Veronica gets remade at all, you would think that Code Veronica would definitely get it. I mean, at some point, because of its plot significance. I mean, it sets up the stage for Resident Evil 5 for sure, as well as future Resident Evil games. I mean, Claire kind of takes a back seat after that game, but even still, it is a major portion of the storyline. It is a major element to the game's story, and to just say, well, it's not. I just feel weird about them remaking Resident Evil 4. Not to kind of segue off into Resident Evil talk, but I feel weird about Resident Evil 4 being remade, because Resident Evil 4 is still kind of a modern game, I'd say. I think Resident Evil 4 is still very much a game that you could pick up, you could play today. It plays modern enough, but has enough old charm that it doesn't feel like janky. It doesn't feel weird. And that's what I like about Resident Evil 4, is that it's really a timeless game in that element. It's just a really fun, overall great game. Has lots of great scares, creepy moments, gore. Has a lot of good stuff going for it. Now, I've already talked about it. I'm pretty sure I talked about it, but I'll summarize it very quickly in case I didn't on the podcast. Blah, 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 escort quest with Ashley. What else are they going to do besides remove it? Which would fundamentally not make it Resident Evil 4 anymore, and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I hope the movie's good, right? Like, I never imagined the Sonic movie would be one of the best video game movies ever. Somehow they made it work. I think that that's really great for them. Right before this whole global issue occurred, thanks YouTube. Um, but I never imagined that it would work out, and I'm really glad that it did for them because I think that they really deserved it, especially after listening to the fans and listening to make it more like a Sonic movie as opposed to whatever that monstrosity was. I think that really did help the movie. I think having a brand icon like that look true to form is really important. And honestly, it was an enjoyable game. I mean, an enjoyable movie. It was one of my more favorite movies, that and Joker. Um, so yeah, hopefully it's good. I want to add another gaming movie to the pantheon of movies I like because I think it's really cool to have Resident Evil, which honestly was kind of made to be like a movie. It's one of those original games that could easily feel like a movie. You know, with the janky camera angles, might not be great for gameplay other than increasing the tension of not knowing what's around each corner. But it kind of shoots like a movie, especially the remake really does shoot like a movie at some points. And it shoots like obviously a very cheesy, 90s, 2000s horror movie, but that's kind of the point from what I can really say. I don't think any horror game can really not be cheesy at this point. I think that's kind of the major issue with a lot of games. They can't always just be not cheesy. It's very hard for it to be generic. Or, I'm sorry, not generic. Just that's kind of the horror genre. Why am I even saying this? That's the horror genre. Dumb stuff happens. People make dumb decisions. Sometimes mind-numbingly so. But I mean, how else are you gonna have kills? Either the villain would have to be like super smart. Uh, there was another movie. Oh, the Monster Hunter movie has military people fighting big monsters, which is almost not even Monster Hunter. That's more like that. What's that one game? EDF. It's almost more like EDF in a way. I don't understand how they removed the fantasy sword element from Monster Hunter, but they did. It's made by the people I think who made the original Resident Evil, and they're also doing other Resident Evil TV shows too. Like apparently the Wesker twins or something. I'm really not too big of a fan of them doing this. I mean, it's been like talk for over a decade that all these game studios and companies want to make these big video game movies and media franchises, and the only ones that really did were like Sonic, Ratchet and Clank, Assassin's Creed, Prince of Persia, which I actually thought was an okay movie, just not really true to Sands of Time. And honestly, the only ones that I liked really were Sonic and Detective Pikachu. But the only ones I really liked were Sonic and Assassin's Creed. And as awful as Assassin's Creed got slammed by a lot of people, I think in terms of the canonicity of the Assassin's Creed lore, it's at least kind of helpful. It's kind of interesting to see all these characters, and it ties in. So, I mean, credit to them on that. I would have never thought that it would have worked, but it kind of did. If you really like the games and the story, I mean, I like Assassin's Creed. I'm definitely going to get Valhalla because I'm very much interested in Valhalla. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit is getting remastered for PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. No Man's Sky is getting a 3.0, and credit to them for sticking by that game. I put Final Fantasy 16 on here. I think my new thing now is when it's late at night and I'm tired and I want to add podcast topics, I just throw Final Fantasy 16 on the fucking podcast. Because I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not going to get into it now because I don't really want to. But I am really much looking forward to it. The Final Fantasy 14 5.35 patch just dropped, which includes the Bajin Southern Front, as well as the new Relic Steps. And I love it. I think it's great. I think it really almost has a new expansion feel. I mean, you kind of have to be in Bajin to get that feeling, but it does really matter when they change the battle theme, the open world theme. They add new stuff. It feels like what Eureka should have been. Needless to say that Eureka by far has a lot of problems and still has problems to this day. But it's good to see that the future content doesn't suffer from that. It's just bad because I kind of want to complete the Eureka relics, and sitting in Eureka fucking sucks. So I'll probably do that at the end of this expansion, hopefully. New Amnesia game. I don't like Amnesia, but I know it's a big part of YouTube culture. A lot of people made a lot of videos about it, and I've known a few people who really liked it. So there's a new Amnesia game. Uh, did I talk about this? Blizzard announces the end of StarCraft 2 major development, which is kind of sad because it's been a decade. The 10-year anniversary of Wings of Liberty releasing was just this past August, I believe. And I mean, it's been a decade of StarCraft 2. I mean, in truth, the story ended back in 2016 with Legacy of the Void, and I think there's been a couple other things for it. There was that Nova expansion that I didn't play. But I do feel kind of bad that it's over, you know, to just to think that after all the years of having StarCraft 2 be like the face of Blizzard. I mean, even Overwatch kind of came out and took over a little bit. And I mean, WoW has always been around for, you know, whatever. But yeah, I think it's pretty lame. I think it's kind of sad, but it was going to happen. I think now Blizzard wants to devote a lot of their resources to Overwatch 2, which has kind of been silently not talked about. I haven't really been in the field of Overwatch, though, so maybe that's just me. As well as, what's the other one that they want to do? I can't even remember. You're going to have to forgive me. I'm having a real senior moment. Shadowlands. Wow, World of Warcraft Shadowlands, which I'm not really a huge fan of. The way that they have completely neutered and changed classes in the pre-patch has really been a massive turnoff. And I mean, I guess that's kind of it. I mean, 14, for what it's worth, I think they find kits that work for classes, and while there's not multiple specializations, I mean, which works in their favor because they only need to balance one and make it decent. WoW has multiple, which can be cool, and on theory sounds really cool until you realize that the average WoW rotation is pretty fucking simple compared to a 14 rotation. And a lot of times specializations just kind of suck. I don't think there's ever been a time when Survival Hunter has ever really been that good. And back in the day, I could actually finally say stuff like that. When I was playing World of Warcraft and I was 12, 13, one of the big things I remember doing is that the whole game was different. You could have talent trees. If you play WoW Classic now, you still kind of have that. But if you took your talent trees, and I still have that same character, by the way, Tauren Hunter. I used to dabble in both marksman and survival because I just thought it was kind of cool. I did more overworld stuff than dungeons and raiding, and I wanted to have as many abilities as possible because I like the idea of having a lot of abilities on a class. Even like back then, again, WoW was different. It's not like 14 where every ability I feel needs to have a purpose and be used and satisfying to use. Back then it was kind of like you just kind of push buttons in the overworld. And it was fun but also challenging. You had to plan out encounters, you had to make sure you brought enough supplies and arrows and food. And it was all a major thing. Back then hunters used to use mana. I know a lot of people probably don't even know that. I know people who are playing WoW who are younger than me who weren't even... No, they were around for I mean, they were old enough to play it. They just didn't. But as time goes on, that's going to get rolled back. There's going to be people who were too young to play Burning Crusade. And I think that's one of the cool things about Burning and why it was so fun for me is that you could do a lot of cool stuff. You had your flying mounts and stuff like that. And for what it's worth, as much as Cataclysm may have sucked in the second year, at least it added the ability to fly. I think that's something that's forever really changed how you get around World of Warcraft. But yeah, I think there is a large element of WoW history that is being lost just by them changing up classes and moving stuff. I think that fundamentally now picking only one specialization to really do anything with and removing the idea of being able to blend and mix and mash things together, because there's still talents in WoW that are just not really usable. I mean, if you go on Icy Veins, they'll generally tell you which talents are best. Some are best in most, if not all, situations. Some should never be taken, even in the pre-patch. And to me, while some of the pre-patch of Shadowlands tries to add some of that back, and it does for some classes, I think for a lot of classes it also kind of takes it away. It's not as fun, in my opinion. I think what it really comes down to is just that WoW is trying to be too many things at the same time. It's trying to stay true to its old roots, but it's also trying to be a modern game. And ultimately, WoW just needed to be WoW. It just needed to stay more in line with what it was, what it could be, what you used to be able to do with it. I think that's what made the game fun. And while having flash and story is cool, I think they did kind of take it in a wrong step. I mean, granted, I'm a guy who's only played it since 2010. I've only subbed to it in 2016. I remember when I got my PC. 2017, I leveled a troll druid from like 1 to 96. And then this year, where I more or less got a bunch of characters to 120. I only play Horde, by the way. I'm not an Alliance player, really. I am going to level one Alliance character to play with a friend, and also just in general. But I kind of already don't want to play it, and I already unsubbed. So I'll see how much I get done in the next few weeks to months. What's nice is that I can actually play it while rendering. So that's kind of a positive, because the game is so graphically not intensive. You could basically run it on a fucking toaster. I ran it on my MacBook normal back in the day, not even Pro. I mean, that's the thing about WoW that I think they really missed out on as well, is by not putting it on consoles and by pricing it more expensively than 14, there's a lot of stuff I feel that they could change, that they could really do to mix it up. And WoW, I mean, it insists on looking like a very outdated game, which is fine. I mean, again, I'm the first person to say graphics shouldn't determine how good a game is. They price it $3 above the competitor. And then on top of that, they don't put it on as many platforms as the competitor. I mean, Final Fantasy they've talked about bringing it to Xbox for a long, long time. And, I mean, very well, they might this console generation. But until then, at least they have it on PlayStation and PC and Mac. And, you know, WoW doesn't have that PlayStation presence. And in my opinion, they should have figured this out ages ago. They should have figured it out back in 2010 when, you know, Final Fantasy was first coming out and they were trying to figure that out. You know, having your game available to as many people as possible really does help. In fact, I'm going to actually search up something really quickly. I am not on Google Chrome. I don't know what that keybind does in OBS. If I search up Star Wars, The Old Republic, I'm not sure. I've never looked into this game, really. What? Yes, this is... Oh, God. This is why I don't fucking use Chrome no more. Where's Brave? Thank you. Just let me Google it. Where is it? Let's see here. Is this only on PC? Oh, wow, it is. Okay, I was wrong. I know ESO is not on PC. It's a good thing I checked this before I made the claim it was on PC. That would have been a little bad. It's actually no longer the Tortanic, apparently. Oh, it has free to play? Oh, shit. I might actually try that out then, since it's free. Okay. They actually, on the Wikipedia page, they kind of have to bunk the Tortanic portion. They say it's lost a fair share of its subscriptions, but has remained profitable. Yeah, it's free to play. That also might have helped with keeping it profitable. The people don't have to want to buy into it. I might check that out, actually, now that I look into it. Because I actually kind of like Knights of the Old Republic. It's one of those games I played a lot of back when I was in the middle of my Star Wars craze. So maybe I'll try the Tortanic. I didn't know it was free to play. And if I did, I had no interest. So maybe I'll drop a thing. He stated that 500,000 subscribers need to make the game profitable, but they're still well above that. I mean, even fucking WoW doesn't even talk about monthly subscriber numbers. I think that's one of the biggest elements of WoW, is that they flat out... There's such a thing as WoW internet, cable, and phone. Oh, shit. WoW doesn't like to talk too much about their subscribers. I don't think they flat out talk about almost any of it. I think part of it that they also should do is maybe uncouple classic from, I guess, what they call retail. But I feel like on the flip side, if they did that, you'd really get to see how many people actually give a fuck about playing retail. And that's what I mean. Like, I can't just say that I would never really want to play retail. I want to go back to the past. Like, Burning Crusade servers would be my ideal. I would also accept Wrath. I would like to have the flying of Wrath I think that would be kind of, or the flying of Cataclysm in Azeroth, but otherwise leave it unchanged. I think that was when the game was really at its peak, in my opinion. But I digress. Honestly, I kind of just miss that old game aspect. I miss that whole open world, anywhere PvP, anytime element, because it made the game more fun. It made it more interesting. I think it definitely had a stronger presence when, yeah, people could troll you, but it added to the whole concept of having open world PvP. Now, the PvE PvP distinction no longer matters anymore. Like, servers will say that they're PvP and PvE, but it doesn't matter anymore because now you have the war mode option. You kind of just don't. I don't think the servers matter. You opt in or opt out. You're not permanently opted in or permanently opted out, and you can only enable war mode by going back to a capital city. You can't accidentally enable it. It gives you a whole bunch of bonuses too, but whatever. I'm not sure if RP in normal servers matter anymore. I mean, RP never really mattered from what I could tell. I'm not a role player. I'm a shit poster, but not a role player. Those two things sometimes align, like like celestial bodies almost. But other than that, yeah, that's mostly all I have to talk. Oh yeah, yeah. So PS3, PS Vita, and PSP Online and mobile store functionality is being axed. If you want to buy anything off of those platforms, you will need to buy it using the device itself. Needless to say, this is Sony prepping to kill off support. We've seen, I think Xbox did a couple of things with the 360 before. But other than that, I mean, it's to be expected, so I'm not super, up in arms about it. But other than that, I mean, that it is what it is, right? So in any event, that is the podcast. I will see you guys ideally in 2 weeks. Who knows if and when that will happen. And I don't really have much else to say. I think it's fairly straightforward. I'm glad I waited. Luck has it for me today that Microsoft talks about their deal today, so I could have that as a thing. But yeah, it's pretty sweet. Hopefully see you guys later.